Bring it home, guys. You know, funny, I feel like I just talked about an episode called Endgame. Nah, it's probably nothing. I don't have a lot to say about this episode, guys. It's a really, really heavy action episode. A lot of CGI. Apparently they had issues rendering it. Took forever. Took a huge amount of time, effort, resources. They spent a huge chunk of the season budget just on the effects of just this episode. Pays off, though. In my opinion, they do a really good job of presenting the battles pretty well. Like, I mean, yeah, it's dated CGI, but the animation, the directing, the editing, in my opinion, is really good and gets across the idea of the storm that is building around Mars and around Earth. One of the things that we talked about a while ago was the comforts of the dying. There were refugees showing up, and some of them were beyond care. And it was a point, it was a significant thing of what do we do with these people whom we cannot help. Logically speaking, we should just let them, sit there and rot on the floor. They're going to die anyways, and use up the space we have available, which is limited, in order to assist with the people who we can save. Emotionally speaking, no one should die cold and alone in a dark room, right? It's an interesting moral and ethical dilemma because no matter which side you pick, you're doing something wrong. And I like that about it. But it kind of applies to Ivanova here as well. What do you do with her? I mean, she would want to be in that final battle. There's no question or hesitation whatsoever about that statement. But at the same time, at the very least, her final few days could be in peace, right? And, well, not to... I mean, I guess it's not a spoiler at this point, but obviously her going back to B5 does end up saving her life at the cost of another. Gotta admit, didn't see that coming when I was first watching this show. As I mentioned in the last episode, everything was in place for Ivanova to die. Narratively speaking, I mean, thematically speaking. Marcus laying down his life for her is not something I would call out of bounds for him. In fact, it is very in character for him to do everything he did. He bailed in the middle of a battle, having accomplished his objective, I might point out. So he didn't desert. He didn't go AWOL. But he did, once he accomplished his objective, he just got the hell out of Dodge, went straight back, found the device, researched into the device, found it, went tearing, wonderful direction on the set for the med bay area, by the way, tearing through it, found it, hooked it up to her, and now he is trading his life for hers. Now that may sound like a big romantic gesture, and that's because it is, but it is still thematically significant to this episode, okay? Just keep that in the back of your mind. I'm going to build back up to this point on the other side of the story. Interesting point. I've always found it funny to go back and read message boards and old email groups, stuff from the quote-unquote earlier days of the internet, when online communities were really starting to bloom. We started to see groups of Star Trek fans, for example, on the internet. On the internet, right? Back when that's what we called it, because it was just the internet, and we didn't really have, 4chan or, Discord or Tumblr or anything else like that. This was a while ago. But I was reading a few about Babylon 5, and it's amazing to me how many people were complaining about this episode. Wah! This whole episode's unrealistic, and I don't understand why this is happening, and I can't possibly believe by this. What's funny is JMS actually was responding to a few of these. This was also back when certain creators, not all of course, would actually make a point of interacting and reacting with their fan base. It's the kind of thing that used to happen a lot in person, actually, at conventions. You walk up to a writer-director, and they were available to just chat. It doesn't happen as much anymore. Probably because the weirdos made it worse for everyone. Thanks, weirdos, for making it worse for everyone. But seriously, I do like how there's so many oh god, this I don't understand. For example, how could you possibly get all these things shipped onto these destroyers? Funny fact about military shipping, there is a lot of security around military shipping, and it's usually involving a quartermaster for either a fleet or a dock. And that quartermaster has a whole division of security people at their disposal to help make that happen. But my point is, once that stuff is shipped from the dock or carried from the dock onto the ships, That's it. That's the security. There's no additional checkpoints, or at least this was true back in the day. I actually don't know if military protocols have changed in the last 20 years. I haven't really been involved in the U.S. military since, like, 2002 at this point, so, you know. But the point remains. It's actually fairly easy to understand how you could do that. You get the quartermaster at a dock on your side, and yeah, you're going to be able to smuggle pretty much whatever you want to on board those ships. The question is, you know, if you're going to be able to keep it there, and these telepaths work brilliantly, don't they? I love the scene where Franklin is arguing for why they're doing it. And I love that scene because he hates himself for it. He's already said this. Sheridan's right. We need to do this. Sheridan is right in this usage of these people. They are already weapons. They're already tools that need to be utilized for the salvation of this war. All of that is true. Doesn't make it easy. And in fact, he hates himself for it. And I love the fact that Garibaldi, who is, once again, back to being Garibaldi, love his code names, by the way, walks up to Franklin's like, you know, after Franklin has just gone out of his way to explain all the many reasons they have to do this, it is Garibaldi then walks up to Franklin and says, we had no choice. And then Franklin's just like, ah, I know. I love it. I love it. They have a nice strategy at the initial stage, a good first move. First of all, you need a lot of precision to do it, but they have that thanks to the exact coordinates they could give for a jump. So they jump in, and they start, you know, running around, just causing absolute havoc. Remember, the White Star ships are really small, really maneuverable ships with the general power of a destroyer. That's the whole reason why they have such an advantage. They're not actually that strong themselves. It is the fact that they are that strong while being that maneuverable, that small. That's what makes them so powerful. So those kind of ships can do all sorts of stuff in in atmosphere that, you know, other ships can't. I love the idea of using one of those as a ground target, not only as a distraction, but of course to destroy a lot of the military hardware on Mars proper, which, if things go badly, is going to help the resistance out, can cause a division in forces by dragging some of them out, or, at the very least, you're just hampering the enemy forces for the future. No matter what, that is a win. And that's one of the things I like about that particular strategy. Even General Lefcourt comments on that. Speaking of General Lefcourt, this is a good time as any to talk about this. What do you think of him? No, seriously. Because I've heard two different interpretations of General Lefcourt. Lefcourt, there's no T there. The first interpretation is that he's a tool, that he perceives himself as someone who only obeys the office of the presidency and nothing else. Now, of course, he was monitoring the situation because it's a combat zone and that's what you do. So when he hears that President Clark has killed himself, oh, well, all of a sudden those orders he was receiving are no longer valid because they're not coming from the president anymore, because there is no president, and therefore he's no longer in an obligation to not come in and save the day. Now, I actually think that is the most likely interpretation, which is a shame, because I prefer the interpretation that even though... Well, look, let me put this in a different way. I'm just going to skip ahead. One of my overall themes of this episode, one of the biggest themes of this episode, is the perspective of a soldier, what a soldier is. Sheridan gives a huge speech about, you know, you're not alone and we're going to make this happen and blah, blah, blah. But all of it and all of what Sheridan has been doing for the past X number of episodes, which has been quite a while at this point, has been all about what a soldier, what the ideal, the military ideal is. Someone who thinks, someone who reasons. You know, I mentioned earlier the fact that it is a soldier's duty, under certain circumstances, to question their orders, to think about them, to combat them if they disagree with them, to not do them under certain circumstances, you know, illegal orders and all that concept. That is... In fiction, I know this is a lot more complicated in real life, but in fiction there's usually two perspectives on a soldier. That's one of them. You know, you don't follow illegal orders. You think for yourself. You are a person, not a tool. Well, the funny thing is the other perspective is that you are a tool, not a person. That you are nothing more than a blunt instrument that is utilized by your government for whatever they want. That's not your job to question. That is not your purpose to think about it. The only thing that is your job to think about is how best to implement your orders. You are a tool. Do it. Now, obviously, I don't agree with that second interpretation, but it is one that has been brought up many times, both in real life and in fiction. And General Lefcourt pretty much flat out states that that is his interpretation. Which brings me back to the defense of Earth, because it is a government's job to, it is a tool's job to do what they are told to do. And I like the second interpretation because what he does in the end is prevent a tool that was ordered by a government from massacring civilians. That brings me to Clark, by the way. I mentioned this earlier. Clark, this is one of the extremely few times we see Clark at all. And I think the only time we've seen Clark where he hasn't been on a view screen. How weird has that got to be to be that actor? Who are you playing? I'm playing one of the main villains of Babylon 5. Yeah, which episode are you in? These three? But again, that was never the type of villain Clark was. If I can derail for just a moment, I've always very strongly believed in putting care and quality into small characters like that, even though there's not as much prestige involved, even though the actors might not feel like they're a big role. Having good acting and good presentation, even in the little roles, is very important. It's something I used to praise BioWare about back in the Dragon Age era, for example, when they would put so much care and crafting even into random NPC 7, and there would still be good voice acting and good, etc. Right? It's the same thing here. I do like the guy they picked to play Clark, even though he has no lines in this episode. You can see everything. His body language as he's writing his note, the ascension of the ordinary man, and scorched earth. It's a nice touch. And I love this because this really, really helps emphasize this. I've been pointing out several times, and even in this episode they say, we are against the regime. We are against the Clark administration. Whoops. What are you doing, desk? There we go. We're against the Clark administration. Clark himself was never really a threat in the same sense Cartagia was. He was never really a threat in the same sense Bester is. He's a lonely man who dies alone in the dark in an empty room. And we see the kind of person he really is, too, not just because of that, but because as his final act before killing himself, I'm sorry, I'm actually having trouble really comprehending this. Those defense platforms are not exactly meager. They've been mentioned, I think, once before now, as a byproduct of the military expansion after the Earth-Minbari War. And those are going to do a hell of a lot of damage to the planet they're protecting if they are set up like that. They even mentioned that one defense platform could pretty much wipe out the eastern seaboard of North America if it was to fire. Think about that. He was willing to decimate's the wrong word. He was willing to devastate probably around the billions mark of people because scorched earth. I'm going down. So screw you, you're all going with me. And this again speaks to that whole desperation thing. Or, more accurately, the hopelessness. Because I think they've moved past desperation at this point, and moved straight up into, yeah, no, this is over. And we see a lot about a person in what they do and how they do it when they're at their final moments. I actually talked about that in brief when it came to the fake execution for Sheridan. What you do in that moment is different, and it's hard to predict what you'll do in that moment. We now know what Clark would do in that moment, and that's butcher millions, if not billions, of civilians. That's the kind of enemy the Clark administration is. In hindsight, using the telepaths in this way was always kind of obvious. We've actually physically seen on camera what happens when one of these telepaths is woken up. They go, and they turn into that one Superman movie. What was that, Superman 3? God, I don't even remember. It's been a long time. Anyways, they just merge with the machine, right? So you smuggle telepaths onto destroyers, and they merge with the machines. Even if they don't, that's just damage. That's just basically like tossing an EMP into the middle of the ship. Lord knows what could happen, and of course they can fight against it and repair it, but that was never the point. The point was to temporarily disable even. And that's the brilliance of it. We see once again the definition of victory and how it's relevant to Sheridan's assault. Only target their engines, only target their weapons. We need to leave alive ships behind us. Which is smart for many, many reasons, not the least of which being the fact that if you have a civil war which leaves you defenseless, well, you're suddenly reliant on the good graces of other races and other powers to, you know, not just kind of swoop in. But regardless of that, of course, Sheridan doesn't want to kill more people than he has to. This is a civil war, after all, an insurrection, really. And I love the idea that I'm trying to think how best to put this. I love the idea that Sheridan has to choose. This is actually going to come up in the next episode, so I'm not going to cover this too much here, but he has to choose between sacrificing soldiers and other soldiers, or victims. I mean, really, let's be honest, those telepaths are basically civilians, in order to try and save his soldiers and their soldiers. And if you think about it, it's not really that cut and dry, moralistically speaking. From a purely tactical perspective, it was brilliant. Morally? Oh, I bet Sheridan's killing himself over that one. Inside, I mean, unlike Clark, who was killing himself outside. um, I'm just glancing at my notes here. I'm not actually sure I have much else to say. This is a great episode. I'm just looking. Okay, so let's go ahead and see. Yeah, okay. I got three more things to talk about. First of all, I love the Sheridan speech he gives. I already kind of talked about this, but I love the speech he gives and just the general call to arms. It's, again, that kind of naivete, but in this case, it's very justified. It's not actually... It is still his naive nature that makes him call out to Earth on an open channel and say, yo! But it was still the right move to make, because there are resistance groups on Earth. We've known this for forever. Several of the churches were part of that group. You remember? All the way back in And the Rock Cried Out, No Hiding Place. That was the beginning of Season 3, I believe. All the way back then, we've had this... Or was that the beginning of Season 4? God, I don't actually remember how long it's been. Point being, we know that there are active resistance cells on Earth. So, even though what he is doing in his mind is saying, all right, there's no need to be afraid. You can fight against the bad guys, because that's the relatively simple, honest nature that John Sheridan is. What he is actually doing, tactically speaking, is saying, hey, the cavalry's here. You know, we're ready to fight back. We're ready to actually do stuff. And that was the right call to make. As you see Senator, what's her name? I don't actually know who she is. We'll find out soon. Walks up and just like, hey, comes there with an escort, an armed escort, complete... I forget the name of that. There's actually a term for that formation where the person is completely surrounded in close quarters by soldiers, and walks right into Clark's room to arrest him. Nice touch, by the way. Second thing I want to talk about is the fact that it's the same reporter. This goes back to that whole little roles thing, like the Clark guy. They got the same actress, if I'm not mistaken. I should have actually verified that before I said it. I thought they got the same actress. I can't say that with definitiveness. It would be cool if they got the same actress, because that would add to the symmetry of the situation, that she was actually able to come back online and come back on air for this. Even though it's a bit role, that adds to the role. Again, like I was mentioning earlier with Clark. But her performance, regardless, is phenomenal. She does a great job of sitting there and acting like someone who basically just got let out of prison, probably like an hour ago. Funnily enough, this is another one of those things that certain people were questioning on those message boards. Those people have never seen these kind of people in action, I'm thinking. JMS's own response was that after certain reporters were let loose in the Soviet Union, I want to say, they went out and started reporting like right across the street, just bam, just like that, because that's kind of how that works when you have someone under these circumstances, you know, political prisoners and whatnot, who actually genuinely care about what they're doing and their belief. And the idea of being free and in that camera, there's a surreal quality to that. Like, imagine, well, I actually don't want you to imagine, but imagine something horrible has happened to you, and then just back to normal. Just back to normal. That's going to feel so surreal, isn't it? That's going to feel so lucid, just... And you can tell as she's just, okay, I'm on camera. Hi, guys. They do a good job of it. I like it. Ramming speed. This is how a human dies, right? I mentioned earlier, you know, the two perspectives on a soldier. But I love how, without words, John Sheridan demonstrates the most powerful aspect of the military ideal in this episode. This is where it really comes to a head. I know it sounds funny because it sounds like such a simple choice, but you need to really put it into perspective. John Sheridan is about to kill himself and his crew and his ship, all things that matter to him, very much so. And they all follow it without hesitation because they are all soldiers. And a soldier, a military ideal of a soldier, is someone who will lay down their life without hesitation if it is needed to save a complete stranger. To save someone they've never met before and never will again. And I love that. I love that scene where they are prepared to lay down their lives to stop that salvo from butchering God knows how many people. And that's when Lefcourt comes in to do the same thing. There's a poetic irony of that scene and the nature of what a soldier is and the difference between a soldier and a tool. Now, of course, there's some opinion thrown into that, and I have given my own opinion as well, obviously, but I think JMS is kind of on my side of this, given the fact that he wrote the damn thing. Or I should say, I'm probably on his side. He's probably a little older than me. You know, it would have been, well, before I get into that, speaking of symmetry, speaking of poetic irony, Babylon 5 effectively started with the Earth-Minbari War. I mean, yeah, there was some stuff before that, and there was the whole Shadow War, and the Vorlon thing, and the old ones, the first ones. Yeah, there was all sorts of stuff like that. But really, the story of Babylon 5, if you were to write the prologue of the book, Babylon 5, not only the guidance stories, not only the backstories or anything like that, but where the story actually started would start with the Earth-Minbari War. It is the center point of so many events. It was such a significant thing for almost all of Season 1, kept coming up constantly and was informing and changing so many events and caused so much to move forward. It is still relevant, although at least as of Season 2, arguably past that. I love the fact that in this episode, which effectively totals an end of a chapter of Babylon 5, and in many ways could be seen as the last episode of B5. I'll get more into that in a few episodes. That we see Earth being aided by a Minbari fleet that comes in and helps to save Earth from those same turrets that were put up because of the Earth-Minbari War. The symmetry of that is phenomenal. I love it. You know, it would have been easy, for me to drop my notes, because I just did. It would have been easy to forget about the alien healing device. I don't know if you remember, and I actually don't remember if I did this, but I made a point mentally, way back when the healing device first came up, to kind of mention that it might come up in the future. Now, it did get brought up a couple of times, you know, the Garibaldi thing, for example. But the real reason I was mentioning it was for this episode. I love little continuities. I really do. I feel that for shows and for books, for games, and for movies, little continuities really help flesh out, really make it feel more real, like these things are actually happening, rather than, hey, here's something, and then we're going to forget about it and never use it again. You know, I hate that mentality. I hate that thing where it's like, here's a new strategy, here's a new idea, here's a new crew member, here's a new character, here's a new technology, and we're never going to mention it again. I like works that bring that stuff back in the future. Even if it's only a little thing, at least you're acknowledging that it's there, and it's still having some impact on the setting, rather than just being a whiff of cloud. Oh, what was that? You know, it's gone. So seeing the alien healing device come back for this makes perfect sense. And, well, that brings us back to Marcus, doesn't it? I know 3 people off the top of my head who consider Marcus their favorite character. And every time they see this episode, they're just like, ugh. It is also amusing to me. See, Marcus isn't really a soldier. Ivanova clearly and definitively is a soldier. Military ideal, just like Sheridan is. Marcus is a special agent, basically, if we were to classify him. He's a ranger, right? This is not the first time Marcus has been willing to lay down his life for his cause, for what he believes in. And it is appropriate because this thematically ties back in with what I was talking about. That he is willing to lay down his life. A soldier is willing to lay down their life for a stranger. But a special agent, someone like Marcus, someone who's a romantic, someone who cares on an individual level, Marcus is willing to lay down his life for someone he cares about tremendously. I don't have anything to add to that. Damn good episode. But we're not done yet. Most shows would either end on this episode or the next episode, or have this be a series finale or whatever. But nope. Got a couple things to clean up first. So, I'll see you guys next time.